Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. It is exciting to have you here with us this evening as we kick off Cooee's webinar tonight, Developing Your OT Career in a Multidisc Practice. So thank you for joining in and for coming along the ride with us for the next 40 odd minutes or so as we explore this really exciting topic. So I'm going to get us started just by acknowledging the traditional owners of country that we're calling in from and hosting the webinar from today, which is the Turrbal and the Yagara people. And I'd like to recognise their ongoing connections to land, waters and culture, and also pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So as we kick off, I'm just going to introduce myself and Hanna, who's here with us tonight. Some of you may know us, and that is absolutely fine. So I'm Marion. I'm the owner and director of Cooee Speech Pathology. I'm a speech pathologist by trade, and I am also a certified integral developmental coach and a trained master practitioner in neurolinguistic programming. So my background and passion is in kind of business strategy direction and also deeply in personal development. And that's where a lot of tonight's content is leaning into, is what does growth look like? What does development look like? So really excited to bring that in today. And we also have Hanna.
Hi, everyone.
So Hanna is our clinical lead OT. Some of you may know Hanna personally as well. Hanna's been working with Cooee for
9 years.
9 years now, I think, right from when Cooee was a baby practice and it was just me and one other speechy part-time, all the way through to now where we are a multi-disc practice with speech and OT. So Hanna also is a certified neurolinguistic training practitioner as well. So we're going to jump on in, and tonight the context is really going to be looking around growth and development and pathways in particular. So when we talk about pathways, we're looking at growth and direction. What does your path towards developing your career look like for you? We're going to talk about some key principles that we think are really important and that Hanna and I have dynamically explored over the last decade of working together in private practice. And Hanna in particular is going to share her personal examples of what it's looked like for her in bringing this to life. So really, really exciting. And let's jump in. So we're going to kick off with our first principle tonight, which is understand your scope. So as an OT working in a multi-disc practice, you may find that really having a clear definition of your scope actually gets a bit blurry. Has anyone experienced that so far? I've got one nod anyway, so we'll go with that. Yes. And something that Hanna and I have really deeply explored is the immense power and influence that comes when an OT stands really strong and grounded in the certainty of the scope that they do. What that looks like is not watering down what occupational therapists do. Right? Has anyone here had a feeling that in maybe when you're working with speeches or you're working with psychs that you're just a bit of a sensory toolkit at times? People just kind of like, oh, just tell me what to do to regulate this child. And that kind of defines the extent of the OT role. Does that seem familiar? Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Love a bit of interaction. Or
someone that can just help with a pencil grip.
Yeah, can't you just keep them in their chair for me? You know? And the OT scope, as it's deeply understood, is around functional capacity across environments. And that's where some of that blurriness can come. And when we think about developing and creating a pathway, the more deeply you can understand your scope of practice, the interventions that sit within it, and how that interfaces and overlays with speech, psych, physio, exercise phys, and whoever else you're working with, the clearer you can communicate with authority from that place within your scope, without diluting it down, without extending into areas that really aren't within your scope, which is something that we can also tend to do at times. But by really owning that section, you get to leverage your expertise in functional, applicable interventions. You are the only therapist that look at the whole picture in the way that you do. And there's incredible value to that. Hanna, I'm going to let you jump in on that.
Especially with regard to occupation. I mean, like our primary role is to look at, well, with children especially, is to look at occupation and what that means. And we have a really unique set of skills when we look at occupation, and we're able to look at task analysis as well. No other profession does what we do in that respect, which is really, really powerful. And over the years at Cooee, we've developed our, like, really honed in on what the OT's scope is and what our role is. And that's really helped in understanding how occupation then feeds into other professions like speech and physio. And I guess the other thing that's really important to remember when we're thinking about our scope is that, you know, if we can communicate exactly what we do and exactly our role, and how we look at occupation, how we look at how our clients do what they do, it really brings together the whole picture within the multidisciplinary team. I think we found, especially when I started at Cooee, that Marion and I would talk a lot about what's happening, and we'd, like, especially with social skills, we'd talk about, you know, well, whose role is what, and that kind of thing, and making sure that we stuck to the how and the occupation side of social skills really helped to consolidate how parents understood what we did as well, which then made the OT role within our multidisciplinary team like really valuable. And that's how we've grown to have so many OTs now. So I think that it's really important, and that we're stepping back and owning what we do, especially in the range of sensory as well, because if we don't do it, well, OTs do it well. If we don't do it, other people will try and pick it up, and then it will be done not as well.
And that's the thing, like, Hanna, what you're saying there around value. So really, when we talk about owning your scope, it's like deeply valuing the power of the interventions that only occupational therapists really understand. And so being able to have all of that background knowledge and theory that relates to the physiological processes that underpin what you do, as well as that functional application out here, allows you to communicate in that multidisciplinary setting to families, to stakeholders, to other team members, with that level of clarity that builds authority for you. Right. And so when we think about a pathway, you're looking at carving out a bit of a niche, particularly in a multidisc practice where you might be actually doing some joint sessions. There's a bit of maybe even transdisc work happening. Maybe everybody's doing DIR, and so it kind of looks the same on the outside. So part of creating your pathway is being able to kind of do your rabbit hole and do your deep dive on what is your unique skill set that you bring to the table, to be able to communicate your difference from a place of value and authority as well. Just pausing really quickly. Does anyone have any comments or questions about that before we jump on to number 2? Feel free to write it down in the chat as well as we're chatting through. We'll leave a little bit of time for questions at the end.
I guess the other important thing here is also, when you know your scope, you know exactly which interventions you're providing and which adjustments you can provide to, say, teachers or other disciplines within a multidisciplinary team, and then people will look to you for those adjustments, and not from just like a give me a sensory tool perspective, but a really how can I access this child to enable them to function in all their occupations.
All right, let's keep it moving. So once we've got a really clearly defined scope, we're feeling valuable, we've got things to offer, then we're looking at what does it look like to create a pathway for you. And this tip here, or this slide, is really all about your vision. When we talk about a pathway, you can see that nice little infographic up the top. You've got where are you starting from needs to be clear. Where are you right now? And what's the location that you're moving towards? And when we look at creating a pathway, that's simply figuring out the dotted line in between those two things. But you cannot create a pathway if you don't know your direction you're heading in. So bringing in your own personal vision is a really important part to be able to carve and create a pathway for yourself. So what do we do then, or what happens if we struggle with vision? Does anyone not know here? You can pop it in the chat as well, or give me a thumb up on your screen. You actually don't know what your end point is. You don't know where you want to go or what it might look like for you in 3 to 5 years' time. Does anyone not feel like that's easy for them? Certainly wasn't for me. I had no idea, right? For others, they might have absolute clarity on, in 2 to 3 years' time, this is what I want it to look like, or I want to explore this particular area of clinical practice, or I want to head into leadership. And then it's around backward chaining the building blocks that get you from where you are currently to where you want to be. So clarity on both of those locations is the key. A lot of people don't want to look at where they are right now, right? With real honesty. How good am I clinically? What interventions do I know and don't I know? What is my current scope of practice? How good am I at working with clients? What are my soft skills, my communication skills? How organized am I? How well can I navigate the professional competencies of my role, and being able to really clearly look at where am I at? Take stock there so that you know where you're starting from. When you know where you're starting from and you've got a clear picture of where you want to go, the steps in the middle become vastly easier for you to identify. So starting with where are you and where are you going? If you don't have clarity on that end point, then you're in a position where you get to play with the options. Know where you are right now, and then try as many things, as many opportunities as you can to experience and taste the variety of different types of things that are available for you. As we said, that might be leadership within your practice, or it might be within another practice looking at what somebody else does. It might be looking at clinical supervision and seeing someone and thinking, yeah, I'd actually really love to try what they're doing in a couple of years' time. Maybe you want to dive into the creative side of clinical innovation and bring something to life, a new resource and an intervention, or a particular type of service delivery model or programming. Or maybe you want to go deep on a clinical specialty, and you can kind of touch and taste if you don't have a clear end point that you're looking for. And just notice, the question you can ask yourself is, what is it that lights me up? Hanna, what has this looked like for you?
For me, I have been in private practice for 9 years now, but alongside private practice, I've tried a lot of different things to find what I enjoy, what Marion said, what lights me up. I've done education. I apologize for my daughter in the background playing with a metal cup. I've been an education therapist for 10 years and looking at how we work in schools, what that feels like, what it feels like to work in a consultative capacity. I've worked within Evolve Therapeutic Services, which is mental health clinicians that work within the mental health sphere, working with kids in care within child safety and case management, those sorts of things. And I have also worked within the hospital setting in pediatrics, so looking within infants, and also some of the more complex oncology and cystic fibrosis. So I've done lots of different things to find what I liked, what worked for me. And what I found is certain niche areas within private practice that I really enjoyed and that I was good at, that I knew that I got buy-in with, and that when I walked into schools, for example, people knew exactly what I could offer. And that's really helped to build the type of clinician that I am. It also enabled me to see how much I love clinical supervision and how I love helping other OTs to find what they love. I've done mentorship through OT Australia for years and years and years. So I've done a lot of different things, tried a lot of different things, met a lot of people, and spent time actually figuring out what makes me happy and what I'd prefer to do, because when you've tried something that you really enjoy versus something that you don't really enjoy, you know which one you want to do, because the one you don't enjoy you put off and procrastinate, and you just don't want to do the work. Whereas now I'm 12 years into my professional journey, and I know where I want to be. I know where I'm at, and work doesn't feel like work to me. Work and life is pretty synergistic, and it all just sort of feels natural to move and flick between the two. I mean, there are definite moments where I switch off, but I love what I do, and exploring those options was a big part of it, and helping to find out an exact vision of where I wanted to be, which didn't have to be, I want to be a pediatric therapist that only works with children's executive function difficulties. It was more along the lines of, this is the kind of freedom I want. And I really do apologize for that. This is the kind of freedom that I want, and this is the kind of clients that I like to work with. And I really enjoyed hands-on therapy. So I knew that's what I wanted to do, but I knew that I also wanted a few days where I wanted to do more leadership type capacity, creating resources, supervising other OTs, helping them to find the pathway that they wanted. And that's what I've created for myself at Cooee. I have 2 days of clinical. 2 days of clinical and 2 and a bit days of leadership, where I get to do some clinical supervision, creation of resources, as well as stepping into a little bit of coaching and helping the other team members to realize their personal journey as well. So it really helped to explore and then decide on what I wanted my professional life to look like, and then backward chain. And I mean, as OTs, we know how to do this really well, right? Because when we know what we want to be able to do, we know we can backward chain all the steps to get there. It's what we do. So why can't we do it with, yeah, exactly. Why can't we do that with our professional life and our journey?
Absolutely. And like you might hear, so 2 things to jump in here with is some practices will have set pathways or set options for what progression looks like within that practice. And that's great, right? Maybe part of that is exploring your options, and maybe that lights you up. Some practices do that more boutique style. So creating pathways that are aligned at an individual level with people's personal vision and intention. That's what we do at Cooee. There's no right or wrong. It's just different, right? If you're in a practice though, where maybe the cookie cutter approach of the options that they have aren't singing to you, then you're in a place where you do have to create your own pathway anyway. So having a think about that end point allows you to go, if I was going to create it myself, that doesn't necessarily mean running my own business, but it might mean bringing it to life. What skills would I need? How would I know that I've got there? And you can do that backward chaining yourself. One of the things we do at Cooee is we talk about horizon statements with every single team member. And so a horizon statement is like, if you've got your eyes on the horizon, that's the direction we're heading in. We know that it's not necessarily a goal you're going to achieve, because that horizon continues to move as you move towards it. And that's true for all of us with life direction and pathways. It's not necessarily about getting to a goal, although they may be signposts along the way. It's about, what's that direction? Do I have clarity in the direction I'm heading towards that horizon? And the more clearly you can define that for yourself, the easier it will be to intentionally and consciously explore your options in a way that's in alignment with that vision that you've created.
And I've mentored quite a few OTs that have worked within, say, psych practices or PT practices, and we've discussed lots of ways to talk to their directors about what exactly they wanted to create for themselves. And there's no harm in having that discussion, because it really helps them to know what you want, and it helps you to get what you want. And that's the conversation that I've had with Marion several times. We've changed it and chopped it and come up with new ways to do things as my family has grown and as my interests have grown. And it's such a valuable conversation to have with your directors or your seniors. It really helps to consolidate what you want and really help you to go for it.
All right. Any quick questions on pathway specifically? No. Hey, Hannah, nice to see your face. All right, let's jump into point number 3. So building connections. So if you're creating a pathway for yourself, you're looking at heading in that direction. We've already talked about having a real clarity in your scope, knowing what you do and how it works, and then also the direction you're heading in. Along the way, you're going to be building connections, and you've probably started to do this already. When we think about building connections with referrers and with our networks, our professional networks, what you're doing is essentially building a bit of a personal brand, whether you like it or not, and whether you know it or not. Right? The connections you have with the teachers, the learning support staff, the kindy staff, who else have I got, Hannah?
Through
other allied
PTs,
health professionals
speeches
that you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those opportunities where you're talking about a specific client are opportunities to start to build your own profile and advocate for yourself, and also for occupational therapy and your niche and your spin on it really like specifically. So we want to really spend time building connections, because as you move towards that vision, the connections you make now, 5 years down the track, 10 years down the track, are going to be the opportunities that bring things into your career that you couldn't see coming, right? There have been so many times in my career where I've run into someone that 6 or 7 years ago we had a conversation about something, or these large periods of time go past and then people cycle back in. So this slide is all about making sure you're putting value on the way that you are communicating to your networks. If there's opportunities that you have in your practices to go out and meet kindies, to go out and run fairs at local schools, or to run professional developments for teachers, or to do kindy presentation nights, jump at those chances. Because not only are you going to get better at communicating and presenting as a byproduct of just doing it more often, you're also going to be building your professional reputation that will travel with you regardless of where you work, right? And that in itself is absolutely invaluable as an asset and a resource to your own vision and the pathway that you're building. Hannah, what's this look like for you?
So for me, this has looked like early on when I started with Cooee, I spent a lot of time reaching out to the local schools and just building connections with the learning support teachers. And over time that became I had lots of referrals come in from them because I explained my scope and what I could do and what I could offer. And then we worked closely alongside, provided adjustments. And then soon enough, Marion and I have presented together for our local schools several times. And they've always, when they think of speech and OT and upskilling their teaching team on certain strategies like regulation or communication around regulation, they've come to us first. So taking the time to really invest in them has built our brand, as well as built the knowledge in their heads that when they think speech or OT, they think of Cooee, or they think of Marion, or they think of Hannah. And the other thing that I actually ran into a teacher the other day when I networked at schools, and when I spent lots of time with the heads of special education in schools, I would continually reinforce what my role is and how that worked and how I fit within their system. So how I fit with the teachers and how I fit with the other disciplines, how that fits with that child's education and curriculum, for example. And I ran into a hostess the other day that was like, when are you coming back to my school? Why aren't you back yet? And I sort of had to say, well, not coming back for a while. But it was really nice, because when they think of OT, they think of me. And I've had quite a few teachers that have reached out to me to say, can you just provide some PD to my immediate team? Because I've been so clear in my role and my scope, and I've developed that network, as well as reaching out to the local psychs and physios that we work with. We've done lots of info nights and things where we've done things alongside them, and when they think of, you know, OT, they think, oh yeah, that's right, Hannah, we'll refer over there. So we've got this lovely priority list that has all these referrals that are coming in that are specifically for us, because we've taken the time.
And so what we're looking at here, we're talking about building brand and building reputation, and it's not for the sake of ego, right? It's not just so it's like we look or feel good about ourselves as professionals, but it's because it's about going deep on personal, what we call personal professional relationships, right? We're looking at actually creating networks and that turn into opportunity for co-collaboration and co-creation within the local and potentially even global networks that we're a part of. And those connections that you build are what you can then turn into opportunities that allow you to have more reach and more influence and more contribution than you could have done just by yourself. And that often is what brings us into something like allied health in the first place, is wanting to be able to contribute. And so the strength and quality of your connections outside of the practices that you're working in determines the extent of the opportunities that you're going to have available to yourself throughout your career. Because none of us work in isolation. All of us have a professional reputation, whether or not we attend to it or we don't. All right, let's jump into part number 4. So our final point for you today, before we jump into a bit of a Q&A, is around advocate and seek support. Now, this is a pretty obvious one, right? So for yourselves, within the practices, within the workplaces that you're in, you will need to voice your opinion. You will need to advocate for yourself and be clear on what it is that you need to actually accelerate your development, if in fact that's what you want. That can look like CPDs. What CPDs do you need to access? How does that work within the practices that you're working or the organizations you're working within? And if you have limitations on the budget or the way that those decisions are made, how can you access other types of CPDs? And taking the ownership and initiative yourself to make sure that if CPD is a key part of your pathway, that is not holding you back. Other types of support might be professional mentoring. As Hannah said, she's been a mentor through OT Australia for over a decade. And myself as well, through Speech Pathology Australia, access mentoring very early in my career. And that can be a really powerful thing to do outside your workplace. Regardless of the level of support that you receive, having an external person providing advice that you trust is a really incredible resource. You may need to advocate for yourself or seek more information about personal and leadership development. So personal development, developing your own self-awareness and emotional intelligence skills, or developing your strengths and professional capacity to lead yourself and to lead others. This is something we focus very heavily on at Cooee, because we don't believe that we're robots who come to work and leave all of our personal stuff at home. Even when we think we're doing that, everyone else can tell anyway. So we rather just dive in and bring our whole self to work. That's the way that we approach it. And what that means is self-leadership first. So if you can't lead yourself, then you will not be able to lead anybody else. If you can't reflect on your own clinical performance and drive that forward, well, you won't be able to do that for anybody else. And so the extent to which you can lead yourself, guide yourself, mentor yourself, will be the skills that you have that are transferable to others as well. So it's a really powerful place to start. In your advocacy, as you look at how OT meshes with speech and how it messes with physio, and I meant meshes, not messes, slip of the tongue. What you want to do is both acknowledge the differences, but build on the similarities. right? Something that Hanna and I have always done is known that we are not on opposite sides of the coin, right? We might view the same child through different professional lenses, but we have the same outcome. To do that, we need to not be the same person. We need to acknowledge and celebrate the differences between our professions and the similarities as well. So comparing and contrasting. And know that as you go on this journey of creating your pathway and advancing your career, that what others have done or what others need might not be what you need. And it's okay for your pathway to look different to other people. Hanna, what does this look like for you?
For me, this was a big journey in really seeking out my own CPD and figuring out what I liked and making sure that I was getting the right supervision and mentorship. And we've spent a lot of time looking at what I wanted to do and then making sure that I was finding the right CPDs that worked well with that. I think it took a while for me to actually lead myself and make those decisions. But once I did, it's when I started exploring, it's when I started trying to figure out what I liked. And it was really important that I took those steps, because otherwise I wouldn't have ended up where I am today. And it's really helped me to choose the different pathways and the different trainings that I've done. Because, you know, as a OT, there's so many options out there. And I think what is important to remember is, like, that I remembered was that I was intentionally seeking out people as well that really helped me to consolidate my own understanding of what I was doing. So other professionals and understanding how they worked and how they did things and going, oh, well, I do that a little bit differently and this is what I do. And that helped me to grow my career as well. I apologize for my small human.
Beautiful. All right. So what we're going to do is we've got about 5 to 10 minutes left today. And what I'm going to do is just wrap up this slide and talk about what next steps look like for you, and then open it up for Q&A. So we're happy to stay for the next 10 or a little bit more, maybe 15 minutes, and explore this with you. But I'm just going to round it out so that anyone that does need to jump off at time can, and then we can hang around with the stragglers that would like to. So next steps are, I'm going to follow this up with an email over the weekend or early next year with a questionnaire, a very short 5-minute questionnaire that can take you through a few questions that will determine where are you at in relation to creating your pathway, and some suggestions for steps that you can take that are going to allow you to kind of move forward a little bit for us. In relation to staying connected, there are 4 suggestions there for you on the screen for Instagram handles, because I know that's how we all, you know, tend to connect with people these days. You've got Cooee Speech, obviously, myself as well, if you're interested in following along the lines of leadership and mindset. Yes & Co is the coaching company that I work within that does personal development courses, retreats, and coaching, and they have a lot of info up on the Instagram and also on their website. And then business coaching as well. Clinic Mastery is a fabulous community and resource if you're interested in business and running a practice. So there are a couple of next steps for you. What we're going to do now is jump into the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see all your faces, and we're going to open it up to, first of all, what questions do you have? And then I've got one for you. So let's jump into it. Stop my share.